Thank you, Don. All right, most of you know it's fairly customary that either Mike or I introduce the speaker, but seeing as how it was my father-in-law and also a retired meteorologist who lined this up for us, I'm going to have Dennis Rogers come up to introduce our speakers for tonight. Mr. Dennis Rogers.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce two fine speakers for the group tonight. Dr. William Gray, Professor Emeritus at CSU, has done some landmark work and in climate studies and specifically in seasonal forecasting of hurricane activity. And from that climatological study, he transitioned into the global warming question. And as a co-speaker tonight, we're happy to have Barry Schwartz, who I happen to have been friends with and colleagues with since the mid-'80s. Barry and I both worked at NOAA in Boulder, and Barry also retired from NOAA at the same day and hour that I did. Barry has been working with Bill on assembling and analyzing enormous data sets. Barry's a master at handling and manipulating enormous data sets, and that is the meat and bones of climate research. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bill Gray, who will start off the talk, and he'll transition over to Barry during the talk.
Global warming thing is really a big hoax that has been perpetrated on the American people. So to quote Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, he said, "This may be perhaps the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people." I think it is. You go back, it just, not that I'm against global warming or anything. If I thought CO2 could bring about the global warming, which all the media says, and the politicians say, I would be in the camp with them. I'd be to cut down fossil fuels and go to renewable energy and things. The problem is the science just isn't there. We're not going to have global warming. We haven't had any global warming the last 15, 16 years, and we have had some warming since the 19th century. We're coming out of the little ice age in a natural sense. It's not humans that are doing it. I think it's the deep ocean currents have changed, and most of the climate change we've seen is natural. Now the problem with going to fossil fuels, demonizing carbon, and going to renewable energy, that costs 3-5 times more if you really figure it out what fossil fuel energy costs. And if we go that route, we're going to lower our standard of living, and it just will not be good for the humanity, I think. Now, this idea, I believe, and I've been following it long. I'm 83. I've been 60 years working in the field. I've never believed it when it first came out. And I've been shouting and crying, and of course, I've lost all my federal money long ago. I had money from NOAA for many times. I had a phone call from Al Gore's office once due to my work with hurricane prediction, and he wanted me to come in to have lunch with him with a panel, and I asked who these people were. They were all global warming. I said, I'll be glad to come in and talk about it, but I want to let you know I don't believe that CO2 will do the things that it is. I've been working in this area my whole career. And of course, the fellow calling for him said, well, we'll get back to you. Anyways, I never heard of him. I've lost all my federal money and stuff. This is what happened. It's a vicious field out there, I'll tell you, with regard to grant money. Boulder, if you're associated, you know, you follow the media of Boulder, you see, my gosh, NOAA is for it, NCAR is for it, all the government agencies. because they're getting tremendous funding to explore this climate change issue. Anytime anybody can dig up some data or show something that indicates that, oh, well, CO2 may be making the globe warmer or changing the climate, they write a proposal up, get it in, and you'll get funded. My biggest complaint of all is that there hasn't been a scientific dialogue, an honest-to-God scientific dialogue on this global warming issue. It's been thrust on us from the politics of the top, and our government has pretty well bought conformity. And the young, it's incredible. The young people I see are afraid to speak out. You can't have an honest discussion. This American science, most all the scientific societies have agreed this is an important problem and things. The problem is none of them know anything about the atmosphere. We have great Nobel Prize winners who say the global warming from the CO2 buildup is a great problem. How do they know? They don't know how the atmosphere ticks. They don't know how it works. And that's what we're faced with. Now, I've got to talk here, and Barry's going to follow on. I'm very fortunate. I'm at an age, what can they do with me? I've got my retirement. I'm devoting the rest of my life to whatever years I got left to fighting this problem. And I believe so strongly in it. I'm very lucky. I'm an old guy who believes in something. Whether nobody else believes it or not, I do. So I want to show you. So we start out, you all have heard of AGW, agnostic global warming. Then we have catastrophic agnostic global warming. Do you know that we're about halfway to doubling of the CO2 now, as far as the effect of CO2 on the atmosphere goes? When you look out the window, do you see catastrophic global warming? How many of you see it? I mean, yeah, it may be a little warmer this summer, a little more drought, as if we haven't always had droughts and up and down, and it's July. What is that? What?
My local vision is not a global vision.
Okay.
What I see going on in my yard is not relevant to the rest of the world. You got to take measurements globally. I can't take measurements in my backyard and expect to get anywhere.
Well, yeah, that's right, surely, certainly, and that's why somebody in South Denver reports, I've lived here 80 years and I've never seen such a hot summer at my house. It has no meaning. Now, here's what you get in the textbooks. This is unbelievable. This is what the college students are all being shown, that when CO2 doubles towards the end of the 21st century, we're going to have this kind of warming. The tropics is going to warm 2 to 4 degrees centigrade, to higher latitudes much more. This is ridiculous. There's no way this can happen. Now, here's what we're talking about. Here's CO2. You've probably never seen a graph of the total CO2 and how, as the years go by, this has gone up here. And you see, we're talking about this little amount of energy here driving these tremendous climate changes. And now don't be scared of this figure. This is a figure of the energy budget of the Earth. And these are in various units, watts per square meter. You don't have to know about this, but here's the amount of solar energy coming in. Here's the amount of albedo reflected to space. Here's the amount of long wave going in. Here's all these fluxes, energy fluxes at the surface. Now, when you double CO2, it's a 3.7 of these units. That's all. It's just a little bit. And you're saying that this 3.7 is going to drive this whole climate system all of which these terms can change. The IR to space, the amount of rain, the amount of all these other terms, condensation, warming, and cloudiness and everything. They can change and have a bigger effect on it than any CO2 has. So now the effect of CO2, you see as CO2 goes up, its blocking of long wave energy to space goes up as a logarithmic power, something like this. As the CO2 goes up, the temperature rises more at the beginning, less at the end. It's not exponential, it's not linear. So now let's look at what's happened since this. The background since the pre-industrial revolution of about 1850, we see that this CO2 has built up like this. It started out about 280 parts per million by volume. By 1958 or 9, it was about 315. It's about 400 now. And people are demonizing this. This is terrible. The world's going to come to an end because of this. And so we're up to the point now where we are about 51% of the influence of doubling CO2 on the atmosphere. So we should be seeing about half the effects that the doubling comes forth with. Yes?
What were the measurement technologies used in 1850 compared to now?
Oh, they weren't as good, but this is probably a fair estimate. They have many other things. This is a fair estimate. So now, the problem is, where did all the hype on this come? Oh, where did all the hype come out from this? It has primarily come by numerical models, climate models. They got in and they started making these climate models. Now, it's impossible to predict the climate in the future. The atmosphere is so complex, it just can't be predicted with any accuracy very far in advance. And I want to show you the problem is, but it can be predicted under short-range conditions. We do have much better progs. One of the greatest advances I've got since I entered meteorology in 52 and 3. I wrote my first paper in 52. I've been around a long time. My brain isn't quite dead yet, though. So the ECMWF, which is a European Center for Medium Range Prediction, they have probably the best forecast unit going. And they have shown recently, last year, skill out to 10 days in predicting the weather. 10 days they can verify it. Now, the climate models go much further. Now, the way they get the skill out to 10 days is primarily with the new satellite and all the measurement techniques. You measure the wind patterns and the pressure patterns, and you can extrapolate and advect these along pretty well for 8-10 days or so. That's the secret of it. However, when you get further along, go out to these longer time scales, you have all these energy problems. Air-sea interaction, condensation, heating, evaporation, cooling, cloud-free radiation differences. It's a can of worms. You just cannot forecast the future very well. Now, if they could, how many of the climate models from NCAR or Washington or around the world make climate forecasts for next year or 3 years or 5 years from now? None of them. Because they're afraid if they put that out, they would be verified and they would lose their credibility, and they don't do it. So they give forecasts 50 years, 100 years, 75 years. They'll all be dead by then. That's wonderful forecasting. Numerical prediction just isn't possible, but that's what's been driving primarily the science behind the global warming issue. Now, here's the climate system. I mean, look at it. Now, do you think you can write code and put this code in and integrate it every 15 minutes for 100 years and be able to predict all these components? It's a can of worms. You can't do it. It just isn't there. The climate models, no matter what they say, are no damn good, and they're all wrong the same way. They all give warming. They all, it's sort of a group think type of thing where they all back each other, say their model is going this, and when they write papers, they review each other's papers, they scratch each other's back with grant proposals and things, and it's a closed-in society that's not realistic, and it just isn't working. Now, what is the physics behind this thing? The physics behind it came out of this famous Charney report. He was a great meteorologist who was instrumental in starting early numerical prediction. And that's been a success out to 3, 5, 8, 10 days. Great success. So the idea was, well, numerical prediction has worked very well. Not so much whether it's going to rain in Boulder tomorrow. That hasn't. There hasn't been much advancement. But whether a cold front or whether the next 5, 10 days are going to be colder weather or something, that has advanced greatly. So what has come out of it is that they thought as CO2 built up, it would warm the atmosphere. And as this would warm the atmosphere maybe 1 degree C if you doubled it. Actually, it's about half a degree because the ocean will contribute energy. And then they said, here's the crux of the error, the water vapor feedback loop. They said as you warm the atmosphere, the ability of the atmosphere to hold more vapor becomes greater, which is true. But it doesn't mean it will become greater. And it, in the upper troposphere, as facts, the atmosphere does not become more moist and block more radiation to space as the temperature builds up. There's this so-called Clausius-Clapeyron equation that says as the temperature of the atmosphere goes up, the ability of the water vapor, of the air to hold water vapor goes up exponentially like this. However, the measurements in the upper troposphere show that as the atmosphere warms, the upper troposphere doesn't get more moist. And it doesn't get more moist because the cumulonimbus that come up with the rain have return flow subsidence around them that acts to dry the atmosphere. So here's one of the big physical crux differences. As you see, you enhance, we know that as CO2 builds up, you'll have a little more energy gain in the atmosphere. And some of this will manifest itself in extra deep rainfall, cumulonimbus clouds. And these clouds will go up and have return flow subsidence. The mass that goes up has to go back down. And this dries the upper troposphere and lets more IR flux to space. Whereas the models assume, following the Charney argument and that report, that as you get more rain, you tend to have the clouds die and weaken, and they leave over more vapor in the upper troposphere. And this greater vapor blocks the IR loss to space and warms the atmosphere. That's the crux behind it. And the measurements just don't go along with it. In other words, if you take air aloft, say take air here, This is at 40,000 feet, 200 millibars. Bring it down to 30,000 feet, 300 millibars. Start the air out 86, saturated. As it comes down to 300, it will lose 86% of its vapor and arrive with a relative humidity of only 14%. The gradient of vapor in the upper troposphere is so great that any subsidence dries, and any subsidence lets more IR go out to space. And the measurements, I think I've gone, so this is maybe a bit technical, but if you get more drying in the upper troposphere, you lower this emission level and you give more energy out to space than if you have higher vapor in the upper troposphere. The emission level goes up, and this equation we all use, Stefan Holtzman equation, gives less energy. So when it gets dry, more energy goes to space and the troposphere cools. When it gets moist, less energy of infrared energy goes to space and things get warm. That may be a bit technical. So anyways, here's what the climate models show. They all have this warmth. When they double CO2, they show that in the tropics, which is half the globe, the temperatures in the upper troposphere get very high. And they do this because they're absorbing more of the IR energy under the assumption that the vapor in the upper troposphere is much higher. And I've taken an average of these and gone over this, and I've sort of looked at the data from, we have pretty good data from the late 50s up to now, and looked at the upper level temperatures in the tropics that have occurred versus what the global models have said they are. And what you find is that if you look at the global models during this period when the CO2 has increased from 315 to 400, you see they get a warming of 1.33. The measurements only show this. If you take the whole doubling, they get a warming something like this. If we extrapolate this to this time frame, we get about half a degree upper tropospheric warming. That doesn't mean the surface is only going to be about half that. So if we get a half a degree warming, a doubling of CO2 in the upper troposphere, we'll get about half a degree there. We can tolerate that. Half a degree, I mean about half a degree is not much, and I don't think it'll be that. It'll be less than that, about half of that. I project perhaps with doubling of CO2, we'll have a warming of perhaps 0.2 to 0.3 degrees C, which would be overall probably beneficial for the globe. We'll also have a little more rain, 2 or 3% more rain that will cleanse the atmosphere a little faster. And the crops grow better. There is a lot of evidence out with the increased CO2 that vegetation in the globe is going a little better. So my suggestion is we should do nothing now with this CO2 problem. Put it off for the next generation will be able to look at it and handle it much better than we are. But we should take no action now. It is premature, and probably the buildup of CO2 will be more beneficial for humanity than detrimental. So with the moisture too, they're having, the models are saying the upper levels are going to moist. The data shows that it didn't, at least during this period here from 58 to 13. This is speculation further. I won't talk on that. There's all kind of problems here that I don't, the one thing the models, their grid distances are too large, and they can't handle individual clouds. And you can get up and down motion and drying here and let more infrared radiation to space than you can with these larger grids. And cumulonimbus clouds, just if they're more intense, they take more, the efficiency of rainfall is greater, you take more vapor out of the atmosphere and have less around to balance, or to be in the subsidence area, and the vapor in the upper troposphere with intense CB clouds is just greater than when it's weaker. Now, I want to show you what Jim Hansen, you all have heard of Jim Hansen, right? The great NASA scientist who is out saving the world. And anyways, he gave this very famous talk to Congress in June of 1988 when we had this hot summer, and there was a lot of planning and everything with this, and it made the press and all that. He had a model where he assumed that the upper troposphere, the vapor content, went up 50% in the upper troposphere. This was a model he was using. And that the relative humidity in the upper troposphere went up too, where we measure it now with more rain it goes down. So this is what he went to Congress from. We knew it at the time. We all said the water vapor feedback stinks. This is what's wrong, but nobody would listen. They won't go to talk to people who have given their lives to studying atmospheric science and how the whole damn thing ticks, particularly me, who's been in the tropics and tropical storms, cumulus clouds, and how all that works. They won't talk to you because you'll give them the answer they don't want to hear. Nobody wants it. Now, here's what Hansen's model gave. What his doubling of CO2, his early model, gave in the tropics, 6-7 degrees warming in the upper troposphere. There's no way in hell this could happen. But that was his model, and everyone believes in models. You have to model it. That's the most, there's nothing, geophysical phenomena to predict it just can't be modeled well. It's too complex. There's too many worms in the bucket, and it just is lousy. So anyways, here's what the CO2 model. The CO2 double modeling said directly from the CO2 you get 1 degree warming. There's a feedback. This moisture feedback is 2 degrees, and the net warming will be 3 degrees. Now, if we had 3 degrees warming at the end of the 21st century of the globe would be much different. It would be terrible. Everything they say is true. I would be jumping up and going to renewable energy and all that, but it's just the physics just isn't there. It's not true. So our estimate is that when you double CO2, the direct effect of the CO2 is not going to be 1 degree, it's going to be half a degree, because the ocean is going to evaporate and you're going to lose energy from the ocean and evaporation. And the feedback is not positive, it's slightly negative. And the net warming, I think, will be 0.3 degrees. So I don't think we have much to fear. But you can't be heard. The press. One of the worst things about this whole issue is the lapdog nature of our U.S. media. They have gone along with it all along. If I hadn't been in this field, I have many talented people in other fields, math, physics, and everything. They go along with the global warming because they don't understand how the atmosphere ticks, and it seems so plausible. As the papers just keep saying, model after model, they report every damn thing that anybody models or says. Japan, there was something that said the end of the 21st century, there are going to be 20 times more typhoons than there are now because it came out of their model and they put it in a paper. The paper will go along with it. This is the biggest, the press has let us down on this. The American media that is the bulwark of our democracy often. In politics, it tries to get behind the problems in politics and false medical advertisement and everything. Had dropped the ball here completely. But there's going to be a shift. So now look, what has happened? Here's all these models now. This is a recent thing that are predicting the warming. This is warming here going on. The models are predicting warming, but the atmosphere is not responding. We haven't had any appreciable warming the last 15, 20 years or so. So they're beginning to fail. This whole global warming thing is beginning to come apart gradually. It's technically coming apart, and in time this will filter down. It's remarkable that President Obama is so behind the curve and so backward to say the things and do the things that he has. It just, I don't know who he has in his advisor, but the politics of it is so strong. And anyways, that's all I am going to say on this thing, except I want to add things. Where it has come from. Yeah, there's a new book out. Barry Schwartz will talk about it. It's called The Age of Global Warming. It's by an Englishman. It's followed this very carefully. It's only been out last 2 or 3 months. It's a wonderful book. We have it here. And on our website, by the way, this website will be on our CSU. Anyone want to look at the slides with this can. But where it started was do-gooders like Club of Rome people and all these people who were very honestly worried about the world. The world, after all, the divergence of wealth in the world is so great. Revolution has to come. TV, radio, communication, all these poor areas, see how we live in the wealthy West. Let's try to alleviate that in some way. Let's try to help the poor people and transfer a little wealth to them. This is healthy for the future of the world. The problem is the corruption in the U.S. and all this stuff. You can't do that. I think the greatest contribution that the industrial world and particularly the West and the U.S. does is keep inventing new medicine, new products, new things to filter down to the third world. That we shouldn't delude ourselves by taking money from us and giving it directly to the third world. It won't work. Efficiency, the middleman will take it all. This started with this idea, and it has been going for 40 years. This book talks about it. There have been meetings, and because how are you going to do this? How they're driving for global government. They want a bureaucrat in Brussels to run our country. The world will be better if we have global government. Then there'll be more justice, unity. People can tell who is making too much and who's making too little and correct it. And to me, that there's a lot of people seriously believe in that. They're well-intentioned people. But how do you pull it off? The only way to pull it off is to scare people. Only people that will scare. In time of war, you can draft people, you can organize them, and so on. So how do we pull this global scare on the world? CO2 is going to change all this. We all must unite and organize to fight climate change. And the only way to do that is scare people. So that's my feeling. Now I'd like to try, I've talked too much. I'm afraid to express my views, you see. But what are they going to do with me? Huh? So I'm going to continue to try to tell the truth as best I can. And now it's worse than I've said. Barry Schwartz has been following this topic too. And that the measurements, there's been contamination with measurements and all kind of problems. So,
Do you want to ask if there's any questions?
oh, well, you want to wait? Yeah, I could take questions now, or we could wait till after Barry Schwartz. Why don't we wait till after Barry? I told Barry if I go too long, you go over a bit. Please hear Barry out.
Well, I'm
He's a good man. He has some good stuff to say.